Viking berserkers remain one of history's most disturbing military phenomena. These warriors entered combat in a state called berserker gonger, a trance-like fury that turned men into something barely recognizable as human. Witnesses describe them biting their shields, howling like animals, and charging into battle seemingly immune to pain. What made them truly dangerous was their complete loss of tactical awareness. Once the switch flipped, they couldn't distinguish friend from enemy, which is exactly why some Viking kings eventually tried to ban them outright. The method behind this madness fascinates researchers today. Saga sources emphasize ritual preparation, chanting, war songs, and religious devotion to Odin designed to induce the berserker state. Modern theories suggest they combined self-induced psychological hysteria with plant-based intoxication, with black henbane emerging as the prime candidate. This drug can trigger aggressive behavior, significant pain relief, and complete dissociation from reality. Their appearance amplified the psychological impact. Berserkers wore minimal armor, often fighting bare-chested, and their roaring charge created an effect that transcended normal battlefield fear. Enemy formations would break before physical contact because the visual alone was too disturbing to process. There was also a variant called Ulfhednar, or wolfskins, creating an entire subculture of animal-themed shock troops. These warriors represent an early prototype of using altered consciousness and theatrical presentation to bypass natural self-preservation instincts while simultaneously collapsing enemy morale before the actual fighting began. The samurai mythology obscures a darker operational reality, while popular culture fixates on honor-bound duels and rigid codes. Period accounts reveal samurai forces routinely conducted ambushes, night attacks, arson campaigns, and targeted assassinations. The so-called ninja work wasn't performed by some separate mystical class. It was samurai and Ashigaru soldiers selected specifically for stealth operations. Daimyo maintained dedicated covert cadres for spying, infiltration, and assassination missions, and these units operated within the normal military command structure. They were just tasked with the dirty work nobody wanted to discuss in formal histories. The term shinobi literally translates to stealth or scout. It described a role, not a bloodline or secret society. Elite samurai retainers filled these positions, conducting raids, rescues, and leadership decapitation strikes. Military manuals from the period warn extensively about infiltrators, surprise fires in enemy camps, and arrow volleys launched in darkness designed to shatter morale rather than stage heroic single combat. The psychological dimension ran deeper than battlefield tactics. The ritual, armor, banners, and threat of relentless pursuit established dominance before swords ever crossed. The same warrior who would bow formally in a sanctioned duel might lead a midnight throat-cutting mission if his lord commanded it. Bushido wasn't some mystical force field against pragmatism. The elite warrior class blended their sword saint public image with operations that sound distinctly modern: intelligence gathering, infiltration techniques, and selective violence executed in complete secrecy. If you want to see more deep dives into military history's most fascinating units, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. The Hashashin perfected fear as a strategic weapon. These Nizari Ismaili militants operated from their mountain fortress at Alamut under Hassani Saba's leadership, training Fidai operatives who mastered local languages, court etiquette, and disguise techniques long before they ever drew a blade. Their operational patience was extraordinary. Assassins would infiltrate a target's entourage for months or even years, learning routines, building trust, and waiting for the perfect moment. When they finally struck, they did so at close range in public spaces with small daggers, maximizing shock value and guaranteeing everyone knew exactly who sent them. Survival was never part of the mission profile. These operatives prepared for death on the spot, reinforced by theological doctrine promising paradise for martyrdom. This made them nearly impossible to deter through conventional security measures. You couldn't threaten someone who who wanted to die completing the mission. The group also deployed non-lethal psychological operations. They would leave daggers and pillows beside sleeping rulers, or plant weapons in secure areas to demonstrate their reach. The message was clear: we can kill you whenever we choose. Saladin himself famously discovered such a warning in his own tent, driving home the point that no amount of guards or walls could guarantee safety. Crusader maps from the period labeled their mountain territories as the country of the assassins, proof that their psychological footprint far exceeded their actual military strength. They demonstrated a principle that would echo through centuries. If you reliably kill or terrorize decision makers, you don't need to defeat armies. You change policy by making leadership fear for their lives. Rome understood information warfare centuries before the term existed. Speculators, derived from the Latin word for observation, were handpicked from elite formations like the Praetorian Guard for scouting, espionage, and special missions that couldn't appear in official reports. Their intelligence gathering went far beyond counting enemy soldiers. They assessed terrain, political conditions, and potential allies while disguising themselves and blending into local populations using language skills and cultural knowledge. Their operational remit bled into covert action. Speculatores conducted sabotage, spread disinformation, carried sensitive messages, and almost certainly performed targeted killings when ordered, even if surviving sources dance around the specifics. They worked alongside exploratores who handled more conventional reconnaissance, allowing Rome to maintain both open intelligence streams and clandestine networks feeding into campaign planning and foreign policy decisions. This dual-track approach gave Roman commanders a massive advantage. They understood a concept that remains relevant today. Real power lies in knowing enemy intentions before the enemy knows yours, then quietly removing key people or capabilities before open conflict begins. The speculatores were essentially a hybrid role, combining special forces operators with intelligence couriers, all embedded within the conventional military structure. Their existence explains part of why Roman legions seem to possess almost supernatural tactical awareness. The set-piece battles that dominate historical accounts were often won before they started, thanks to invisible intelligence work that shaped the battlefield conditions. Mongol cavalry turned deception into an industrial process. The Mangudai, though debated as a specific historical unit designation, represents the elite horsemen who specialized in feigned retreats and elaborate bait tactics. Their core technique was brutally simple: ride forward, shoot arrows, then fake panic and flee. When enemy forces gave chase, believing they'd broken the Mongol line, that route would drag them over hours into carefully prepared kill zones where hidden forces enveloped them from multiple directions. The preparation made it work. Mongol intelligence networks used spies disguised as merchants or defectors to map roads, assess commander personalities, and calculate exactly how far each enemy army would overextend during pursuit. They staged elaborate deceptions with straw figures mounted on spare horses and fake camps, featuring half-burned fires with dummy guards, manipulating enemy scouts into submitting inflated troop estimates and false position reports. Extreme cavalry endurance sold the illusion. Mongol riders really could vanish over the horizon, shoot backwards at full gallop using techniques perfected through constant practice, then loop around hours later to strike exhausted pursuers from multiple angles. The enemy experienced what felt like a spontaneous rout transforming into an ambush, but every element was scripted. The Mongols weaponized ego and the fear of missing out on a decisive victory. That moment when an enemy commander thought, "We're winning, chase them," was precisely when his army stepped into a pre-written script ending in encirclement and annihilation. The Ottoman Empire industrialized elite warrior production. Janissaries began as a standing infantry corps created through devshirme, a forced levy system that functioned as human taxation on Christian families in Balkan and Anatolian villages. Recruiters, deliberately selected rural boys considered easier to mold psychologically, then converted them to Islam, subjected them to intensive training from childhood, and systematically severed all connections to their original communities. This created soldiers whose loyalty locked exclusively onto the Sultan. The system's scope extended beyond military service. The same pipeline routed talented boys into high bureaucracy, meaning a child taken through Dev Shirmi might become a provincial governor or even grand vizier rather than a battlefield soldier. Janissaries were among the first infantry forces to master firearms as an integrated system, incorporating matchlock weapons with tight drill at a time when many European nobles still preferred traditional lance charges. Their battlefield presence carried ritualized psychological weight. The distinctive uniforms, meter military bands, and disciplined formations projected coordinated menace, particularly during siege warfare, where Janissaries typically led the final decisive assaults against fortifications. They represented a deliberate state project to manufacture an elite class of company men who were child-taken, ideologically reprogrammed, and transformed into a corporate bodyguard with both military effectiveness and direct political influence. The system's genius was its totality. By controlling warriors from childhood and offering advancement into civil administration, the Ottoman state created enforcers who had no competing loyalties and everything to gain from the system's continuation. Shaka's military reforms transformed warfare in southern Africa. Zulu Impis reorganized into age-based regiments, trained to run long distances barefoot and engage in combat immediately after arrival, effectively converting entire armies into high-endurance sprint fighters. Shaka redesigned the weapon set for close-range shot combat. The short stabbing spear, called the Ikelwa, an enlarged cowhide shield, encouraged warriors to rush into grappling distance rather than skirmish from range. This forced intimate, brutal engagements that played to Zulu strengths in fitness and aggression. The tactical formation, known as Horns of the Buffalo, became their signature. The chest pinned enemy forces frontally while the horns swept around both flanks to complete an encirclement, with the loins held in reserve to either reinforce weak points or pursue routed enemies. At Isandawana in 1879, this system allowed Zulu warriors, armed primarily with spears and shields, to annihilate approximately 1,800 British and Allied troops equipped with modern rifles and artillery. The Zulus didn't just win through courage, they used terrain intelligently, appearing suddenly from dead ground, and employed synchronized war cries and movement to create the impression they were attacking from every direction simultaneously. This amplified the tactical reality of the encirclement into a psychological experience where defenders felt surrounded by an overwhelming force. The case study demonstrates how high fitness levels, simple weapons, and clever geometry can overcome technological advantages. The formation functioned as an organic surround sound system of violence and fear, overwhelming enemy psychology before superior firepower could establish effective defensive positions. British commandos established the modern special operations template during World War II, created specifically to raid Axis-held territories in Europe and North Africa. These units targeted ports, bridges, power infrastructure, and garrison positions with small, fast-moving teams designed to strike and vanish. They pioneered amphibious and airborne insertion methods that were experimental at the time, taking small groups in by boat or parachute to hit high-value targets before extraction. Recruitment focused on volunteers already serving in quality units, then filtered again for physical fitness, personal initiative, and the ability to operate in tiny teams with minimal supervision. The psychological profile mattered as much as physical capability. Commando raids achieved strategic impact far beyond their tactical results. By maintaining constant pressure on coastal installations, they forced Germany to divert substantial resources into defensive positions, tying down troops that might otherwise reinforce front lines. Every mile of coastline became a potential vulnerability requiring guard forces, draining German military efficiency. The legacy runs through modern special operations forces worldwide. The SAS, U.S. Rangers, and naval demolition teams that evolved into UDT and SEAL units all trace doctrinal lineage, operational dress, or cultural ethos back to these formative raiding organizations. Commandos represented a pivot point where elite warriors stopped being simply the king's toughest fighters and became small, surgical teams whose real weapon was selecting precisely where and when to strike. They proved that strategic vulnerability could be manufactured through persistent, unpredictable raids even when conventional military forces remained stalemated. The long-range desert group weaponized presence in denied territory. Formed for deep penetration reconnaissance in North Africa, the LRDG operated hundreds of miles behind Italian and later German lines using modified trucks adapted for extreme desert conditions. Their operational tempo was remarkable. Between December 1940 and April 1943, LRDG vehicles spent approximately 15 days behind Axis lines, maintaining near constant surveillance in enemy territory. Their primary mission was information collection rather than combat. They mapped routes, monitored key roads in what became known as road watch operations on the Tripoli-Benghazi corridor, and radioed traffic patterns and troop movements to British headquarters for operational planning. The LRDG actively avoided firefights when possible. Survival depended on stealth, navigation skills, camouflage discipline, and vehicle maintenance in an environment where mechanical failure or getting lost could prove as lethal as enemy action. They became the institutional knowledge base for desert operations, teaching early SAS units how to survive and navigate the North African environment. The LRDG often provided transportation for SAS raiding parties, demonstrating how reconnaissance and direct action can function symbiotically. In a pre-satellite era, they created a living sensor network that gave Allied commanders what amounted to cheat-level situational awareness in the desert theater. By simply being present in the right locations with functioning radios, the LRDG allowed British forces to anticipate Axis movements, identify supply vulnerabilities, and position forces with knowledge their enemies couldn't match. Soviet Spetsnaz evolved as specialized units controlled by military intelligence, designed to operate behind NATO lines in the opening phases of a potential war. Their mission set focused on infrastructure sabotage, command disruption, and attacks on nuclear assets rather than conventional battlefield engagement. Cold War planning documents show they were tasked with seizing or destroying airfields, severing communication networks, and attacking nuclear missile installations during the critical opening hours of conflict. Training reputations centered on brutal physical conditioning, harsh discipline, and psychological hardening designed to produce soldiers who would complete any mission without hesitation or moral questioning. This approach inherited institutional DNA from NKVD and MVD wartime special units that blended counterpartisan warfare, internal repression, and battlefield raids into a model considerably heavier on intimidation and coercion than Western special operations analogs. Spetsnaz became a psychological weapon through reputation alone. NATO operational planning often assumed these units had already infiltrated rear areas during peacetime, creating institutional paranoia about vulnerability even when no actual conflict existed. The mere belief that Spetsnaz operators might already be positioned near critical infrastructure forced defensive resource allocation and influenced strategic thinking. They embodied fear as operational doctrine. Their function was making enemy leadership believe the rear area was already compromised and that any escalation would expose more vulnerabilities in supposedly secure zones. The psychological impact of their reputation sometimes exceeded their actual operational capability, demonstrating how cultivated mystique can become a strategic asset independent of battlefield performance. Navy SEALs represent the modern synthesis of maritime special operations. Their lineage traces to World War II naval combat demolition units and underwater demolition teams, the original frogmen who cleared explosives and obstacles ahead of amphibious landings. Additional ancestral units include OSS operational swimmers and scouts and raiders who combined coastal reconnaissance with guiding landing craft, establishing an early blend of intelligence gathering and direct action in maritime environments. Contemporary SEAL teams operate across sea, air, and land domains, hence the acronym. Mission sets include direct action raids, special reconnaissance, foreign internal defense training, and hostage rescue operations, often tightly integrated with cutting-edge intelligence capabilities and technology platforms. The selection process deliberately maintains extreme selectivity. Basic underwater demolition, SEAL training, and the infamous Hell Week exist as much to filter for psychological resilience and team cohesion as for raw physical capability. The program identifies individuals who maintain effectiveness under sustained stress while supporting teammates. Culturally, SEALs have penetrated movies, video games, and popular literature to a degree where the name itself functions as psychological signaling in conflict zones. Enemy forces understand what SEAL involvement likely means for their operational security and life expectancy. They represent amphibious commandos, combat divers, and shadow raiders compressed into a single organizational structure, wrapped in a public mythology powerful enough to influence both civilian perception and enemy morale calculations before any actual operation begins. The Special Air Service established the design pattern most modern special operations forces copied. David Sterling founded the unit in World War II North Africa by proposing a radical concept: small teams inserted by parachute to attack Axis airfields and logistics deep behind front lines. The idea was fewer men achieving disproportionate effects. Early SAS operations relied on long-range desert group navigation expertise to reach distant airfields. Then small teams planted explosives on aircraft, fuel dumps, and infrastructure. They crippled Axis air power more efficiently than conventional bombing campaigns while using a fraction of the resources. The doctrine prioritized individual initiative, improvisation, and small independent patrols capable of surviving alone, choosing their own infiltration routes, and adapting to changing battlefield conditions without constant headquarters guidance. This represented a philosophical shift from traditional military thinking. Post-war evolution saw the SAS pivot into counterinsurgency operations and eventually high-profile counterterrorism, fusing intelligence collection with surgical violence. This model was either directly copied or significantly influenced most national special operations units that formed afterward. The "Who Dares Wins" motto transcended marketing to become an operational design philosophy. Recruit high-initiative volunteers, integrate intelligence deeply into operations, and issue mission-type orders that define objectives while allowing operational freedom rather than micromanaging tactics. If Special Operations Forces have a source code, the SAS wrote it. They demonstrated that doctrine and psychological selection matter more than any specific equipment, and that small teams with the right mindset and support can reshape strategic situations that conventional forces can't touch.